Hey, what's up? This is Christopher Stolle of Realm of the Mist Entertainment. The podcast you are listening to is part of the SJ Network. Go to s-j-network.com. That's s-j-network.com for more great podcasts and information on those shows, as well as information and ability to contact publicist Steve Joyner for more information. Just go to the website and check out the family. Ladies and gentlemen, until then, enjoy the show.
Here's looking at you, kid.
Why are you looking at me? I cleaned my room already.
I'm just working on my Humphrey Bogart impression. It's a line from the movie Casablanca.
If you like old Hollywood movies, you should listen to today's interview with Kat Lively of Calling Old Hollywood.
Of all the podcasts on Mount Podcastia, how did she walk into ours?
We have super publicist Steve Joyner to thank for that.
Steve, this looks like the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels, and welcome to Too Many Podcasts. It's me. I'm back again for another day of amazing women, incredible stories, and today you will not be disappointed. Do you know why?
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
I'll tell you who our guest today is. Her name is Kat Lively, and she's an actress, a writer, a podcaster, a poet, and a musician, a really cool musician too. She's got the punk rock thing going, and she's got a podcast called Calling Old Hollywood, and she's going to talk about the show and talk about herself so we can get to know her. A lot of fun, very enjoyable interview for me, and I think you're going to like it too. So let's get right to it. We'll head on down to the conference room at the Sherpa Chalet to listen to my conversation with Kat Lively about her and her podcast, Calling Old Hollywood. Hello there, Rebels, and I am talking to you from the Sherpa Chalet conference room, of course. And I've got a really great guest on today. Her name is Kat Lively. She is the host of a podcast called Calling Old Hollywood. And we're calling New Hollywood, and she's out there right now as we speak. And she is a writer, a poet, an actress, a musician, and of course, a podcaster. So we're going to be covering all sorts of ground with her, and I'm really glad to have her on. Kat, how you doing?
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm real excited to be on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. I was looking at your bio, and it was really fascinating because it seemed like the Calling Old Hollywood podcast seems to be a result of circumstances leading up to that in your life.
Yes, absolutely.
If you could kind of talk a little bit about yourself and how we got up to this point, how you got up to this point. I didn't do anything about it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I started, it's really a funny story. I started out in music a few years ago. And then when I was on tour in New York in January 2019, I had this very serendipitous James Dean encounter that really, really opened the floodgates for me. And I just kind of reignited a love of old Hollywood that I'd had since I was a child. I was raised on the classic films and music, but, you know, and I appreciated it then, but it really wasn't until being on tour and having that encounter that I really went, oh, wow, just changed my world.
You were living in his old apartment?
I was. So it was kind of a crazy story. It was when I was on tour, I spent about 8 days there, and I had a really interesting dream about him one night. And so after that, the next day, I went to Central Park for the very first time. And I went to go see, you know, the Beatles and the John Lennon thing, you know, Strawberry Fields, all of that good stuff. And then I walked out over into the neighborhood of the brownstone buildings. As I was there, he came into my mind again, James Dean. I'm going, why am I thinking about James Dean? And I looked on my phone for an article, Googled, you know, James Dean, New York. Well, long story short, I was on the steps of his old apartment, and it unintentionally. So it was really weird to have had this dream about him, and then the very next day, here I was, not planned. I'm on the steps of his apartment, and so I really just went, wow. I just felt like I had to do something. So I got in contact with the man who has lived there since the 70s. We became friends. I flew back to LA, and then a couple months later, I flew back to New York, and it turned out that he was going to Spain for a bit and needed someone to watch his cat. So I volunteered, and I got to live in his apartment for a while. It's very interesting.
Wow, that is a truly unusual kind of story. And you got to meet some of his family as well?
I did. That was a few months later. I ended up moving back to Hollywood, and I made an homage, tribute music video for James Dean with a song that I wrote and recorded in the apartment. So the actual recording of the song and music video is the recording that is done inside the apartment in New York. So via that, they had discovered me, some folks in James Dean's hometown in Indiana, and they invited me to the festival that they hold annually every year for the fans. And I was invited to perform, where I met his family, and I was given a tour of the farm that he grew up on as a child. I got to see some very, very special things that belonged to him and that he loved. So it was really life-changing, honestly. Very, very profound.
And all of this became the inspiration for your Calling Old Hollywood podcast.
Yes, definitely the catalyst. Absolutely. I just felt like when I met these people, and I met the family, his family, and I had this moment in Indiana. I'm seeing these people who grew up with James Dean, or who knew him, or I'm just thinking these stories need to be told, because you won't hear these things in biographies. There's a million biographies about actors and icons and musicians, but what you don't hear is, oh yeah, he used to swim in that creek over there, and I don't know, climb the trees. It's just these little things that the public just, doesn't know. I like that. So that's my focus.
We all think of that when, if like you knew somebody who ended up being someone that well known, and you can have that little story like, oh, I knew him when, for whatever reason, or even if it was just like a brief encounter or something like that. He was the kid working behind the counter at McDonald's, and he was really quiet. Now, it's Tom Cruise, stuff like that.
I think it's one of the most amazing things to me, because, it's also like humanizing. We're humanizing these iconic, larger than life, we make them into deities and into these big people, but they're just like us. They were people, and I really like to emphasize that.
Was there anything specifically that you learned about James Dean that you were really surprised about?
I think that the overall was just his character, and the type of person that he was so authentic. And in every story you hear, everyone had their different experiences of him, but just the way that he seemed to think and live was extraordinary to me. He really lived like there was no tomorrow. And it's true. So I just think that's very inspiring. But yeah, there were a lot of little things. He worked at the pool hall in his small town, racking up the pool balls. He'd zip through the little one stoplight town of Fairmount, Indiana on his bike and annoy everybody with how loud it was. There's just little quirky things that I just thought were really, really cool.
And it's amazing how they can turn that into a Hollywood image,
right.
For less of a better word.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about him that he used to do to people that he knew. So when he was a kid, he had some kind of accident in the barn or something like that, and his 2 front teeth were knocked out as a result. So he had 2 fake front teeth, and when he would go out with girls or with anybody, and they weren't looking, he would drop his fake teeth into their glasses, like their glass of water or wine or whatever, just as a prank. So I thought it was the funniest thing.
Yeah, somehow I can't picture somebody like that with that kind of image doing that. But hey, like you said, it paints these people in a different light, makes them look definitely a lot more human, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely.
Who are some of the other people that you've called on in your podcast so far?
When we called Hollywood, so we've been very, very fortunate, actually, very, very unexpected. The son of actor Tyrone Power Jr. He's been on the show. Bibby Hansen, she was a former Andy Warhol film star. We've had Brad Keston, who was the voice of Charlie Brown. We've had, directors, television, film producers who've worked with just legends and icons. Sam Clausman was just on. He works a lot with Jerry Seinfeld, but he was in things with Lucille Ball and used to perform at Rodney Dangerfield's comedy club. And the most recent, the episode that'll be on next is going to be with founding member and vocalist of the band Three Dog Night, Danny Hutton. So we're excited about that. Yeah.
Now, I know you've got a bit of a background in the entertainment field yourself. I mean, you started acting at an early age.
Yes.
And you've actually done a couple movies.
Yeah. So I was a very shy child, and my mother put me in acting classes to get me out of my shell. So I was doing local plays and musicals and things as a child. And then, I've done either like featured roles or just, some background or crew work and different things like that. I was just on the HBO revival television show Perry Mason, and that was quite an experience. So that was a lot of fun because it was like, we were on the Paramount lot every day at 4 a.m. and we were in these like authentic 1930s clothes and 14-hour days. It was very inspiring though. One of my favorite parts about being on these lots is that, I like to sneak off and go see the sound stages where all the history happens and all the other films. So it's always really cool.
Oh, sure. And I can imagine some of the well-known studios too probably have, if they could talk, probably speak volumes.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Paramount Studios is so iconic and historic, and I would sneak off, in between scenes to go see, where Liz Taylor filmed A Place in the Sun, or, where All in the Family was filmed, or things like that. It's fascinating. Perry Mason, and then there was Amy Poehler's new film, Moxie. I did that recently. But yeah, those are the recent ones.
Do you have a special era of old Hollywood that you're partial to, or you really like just anything just going way back?
I do. I love the 50s, the 1950s, and I guess it would be that, and then it would probably be, I guess, the 20s or the 30s. I love silent films, from Buster Keaton, Rudolph Valentino. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is one of my favorite films. Such a great horror film. So yeah, that kind of era, and then the 1950s with James Dean, Marlon Brando, Marilyn, all that good stuff.
I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, and I would appreciate your opinion on this.
Sure.
It seems like a lot of actors, especially from that era, I would say from like the 40s and the 50s, they just have this such iconic appeal to people. People like John Wayne and Marlon Brando, James Dean, as you said, they all just do come across as larger than life. And nowadays, I guess, do you think it's because of social media and there's a 24-hour news cycle that you can hear about people at the drop of the hat, where maybe there was a little bit more mystery back then? What do you think made these people so iconic?
Back then, you couldn't see on Instagram what Marilyn Monroe was having for breakfast. You know what I mean? I think that there's this sense of this kind of enigmatic quality that they really exuded, and you just don't get that today. Back then you could have a star in the spotlight, or somebody could make a really great record or a really great album, and it's still adored and it's loved today. But now with social media, I think everyone is so overstimulated with the content that is coming out that it's hard to focus on one thing. It's hard to zone in on just one person. And it's, it's I don't know, necessary evil, social media. But yeah, it has certainly changed a lot of things for a lot of industries, really.
And I think even back then, I think talent was such a bigger part of their appeal, where, nowadays I hear people, that are on these celebrity talk shows like Entertainment Tonight and what have you. And I'm like, who is this person? What? They were Paris Hilton's best friend. They lived down the road and this is why they're famous. And it's like, what?
Absolutely. People just being famous for being famous, without real talent or even a craft. But even then, acting, in the way the studio set up everything with putting these stars under contract and then kind of, helping them with their abilities and all these different things. I mean, they really were so much more hands-on back then with the way they were with their actors, and not to say it was for the best, because, sometimes they try to control them too much, but it was a different world, everything from dictation classes, the way that they worded things, there's this kind of thing when you watch classic films, you notice the way they speak differently when they were taught to speak like that in the films. And it's just such, it's kind of, you don't see that anymore.
That's very true. Is there something that you adore about like classic Hollywood movies and TV shows that you wish was more present in some of the stuff that you see today?
Oh gosh, yeah. The storylines, for one. They were more clever. They were so clever, If you take a film like, what is it? It's a Wonderful Life, like James Stewart. That kind of film, do you want the moon, Mary? Say the word and I'll throw a lasso around and pull it down. You don't get that anymore. Or Casablanca, it would be really interesting to see if a film like that come out in present day and see what people think of it. I just don't think that I don't know. You really don't know, but it's those qualities. There was so much thought in the dialogue and in the scenes. There was such an eye there that I don't see. It's very few and far between in modern cinema.
That's a really good point about, could you really do a classic movie back then today? And especially now, we're dealing with eras of political correctness and, well, you can't say this now. And back then it was just really looked upon as entertainment and people didn't really overanalyze it and they weren't so easily offended too. You've even got like different audiences that go to see these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And back then they had different rules too. Like, it's really, really interesting. It's like when a married couple, when they showed their bedroom, their beds were separate. They didn't have they didn't sleep in the same bed. Like there were just things that it's really interesting because it's like, in some ways I think we've progressed a lot, and in some ways I think we've really taken a step back. It's like we've upped the ante on the sex appeal and on superheroes and, raunchy comedy, which is all fine because there's a time and a place for every film. You know what I mean? But there really is like a lack of true artistic, I don't know, sincere. There's just something that is lacking in today's films. And I don't know what that is. Maybe there's some kind of secret potion that they buried away with old Hollywood. I don't know. How about what are your favorite classics?
The things that you've addressed are definitely, I strongly agree with what you're saying, that there was a style of writing, there was a style even of just delivering. Everything just had a sort of a flash to it. And I was just going to say, a lot of the movies that I'll go to today, they almost become kind of forgettable.
Yeah.
There's this big buildup and then a stupid ending. And then you're just like, oh no, why did the movie end like this? They could have gone in, 5 different directions and, they took the cheap route out. That's what you feel sometimes, where if you sit like watching a movie like Casablanca or The Wizard of Oz, or even, a lot of stuff from like the 70s as well, or you can look at that today it still has that timelessness about it. And it makes you spit out those words. You know, they don't make movies like that anymore. And it's kind of sad.
Kid, yes, they have that whole thing. I completely agree. It's like how many, I mean, I understand superhero films and I understand everything about what's coming out right now, but how many can we make? You know what I mean? Can we take a break for just a minute and make something else that, is monumental and profound and, something that sticks with people. I think one of the last great films in my own opinion, was probably like Forrest Gump. That was probably one of the most recent like films that really made a big impact on me, that I just went, wow, this is something, Forrest Gump. It was so good.
Yeah, they do have the occasional movies that are standouts. I'm not saying that like every movie that's been out since a certain year is horrible. Like I know when we saw the movie Hidden Figures a few years back about the ladies that worked in the space program, that was one of these like, where's this movie been all our lives? This is something that you can actually come in and get your ticket, sit down in the theater and really just enjoy it from beginning to end. There was nothing dumb about it. There were no cheap routes. They told a story. They had incredible acting. Even A Star Is Born from a couple of years ago was pretty good as well with Lady Gaga.
I retract that statement. I did like A Star Is Born. So there are some. Yes, there are some. There are a few that are really good that I do like. But
I think our problem, Kat, is that they're not coming as frequently as when with probably the old studio system. Like you said, they probably had maybe like a tighter quality control on those movies beginning to end, and and what sold to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some wonderful, not to brag on modern films. There is some good stuff out there that is pretty good. It's like you said, it's kind of, a little more few and far between, but yeah.
So while I still got you here, can we talk a little bit about your music career?
Sure, absolutely. What do you want to know?
You started teaching yourself guitar, right? Around when you were 12?
Yes. Yeah. I was about 12 years old. My mother gave me my first guitar, and it wasn't until after she passed away, shortly after, that I really used that for. It was really honestly part of my whole like grieving process. I picked up the guitar and began teaching myself, and I had been writing poetry, I think, since I had to be maybe 8 or 9 years old, and so when I started playing guitar, I just kind of put two and two together and fell in love with it, basically. I wanted to be a musician for a long time.
Didn't you end up playing with Green Day?
I performed with them. It was just one performance, but I ended up performing with them. And they were, for me, that was, when people ask me, what do you want to do in music, or, what are some of your goals? That was a big goal for me, because when I was, I think I was like 11 years old, and they were one of the bands too, that when I was teaching myself guitar, I was teaching myself some of their songs. They were a big, big influence on me. Very big. They kind of introduced me to punk rock and roll and music, really. Before that, I was just kind of listening to like pop stars and, but I really learned, the Ramones and the Clash and the Sex Pistols and all these bands, and going, because I get so fascinated about people. And so I'm going, well, who were they listening to? What influenced their sound? And through that, I found some bands that are still my favorite bands today. And, it was on my bucket list. I just couldn't believe I did it. And so young too, I'm like, wow, I really did it. So it was cool. Very cool.
And you still also got an acting career as well. Would you ever play a musician in a role in a movie or a TV show?
Yeah, I would love to do that. Honestly, I would love to fuse both worlds together in a heartbeat. I love that idea. That's fantastic.
I had interviewed another actor a while back, Eric James Morris, and he was primarily a musician first, and then he got into acting. And and asked him, the same question, would you ever want to play a musician? And he said, I've actually auditioned for stuff where I get to be a musician, and I never get the part.
Oh, man. That's so funny how that is, being a musician. And I mean, it's film, but I don't know. I love the idea of blending two things that you're passionate about together. There's something about that. It's really cool.
Before I ask you about some of the podcasts that you like to listen to, I got to ask you, I'm looking at your IMDb listing here, and I'm sure there's probably more stuff. In Psychedelic Psychopaths.
Yes.
You played the eye-gouging party girl. Do you want to tell me a little story about this, my friend?
Yes. My IMDb is so not updated. I've really slacked off. But yes, so Psychedelic Psychopaths was a film that my dear, dear, dear friend Tom Zarzecki created. He wrote and directed it and all of that. It was a horror film, and I there's this like big, I basically was like this possessed girl in the film who was killing people, and then at the end of it I gouged my own eyes out, and yeah, it was pretty crazy. I'll tell you, I couldn't get the corn syrup out of my hair for 2 weeks after the fake blood.
Oh, the cost of gouging your own eyes out.
It was interesting. It was interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Huh.
And you're supposed to be in a Netflix TV show?
Yes. So I got casted right before the quarantine for a docuseries, and it was a docuseries on my life and just the whole story. Production was literally supposed to begin March 21st, and the quarantine in Hollywood happened like March 18th. So we were literally just a few days from production and starting all of it.
So will we hear hopefully something in the near future, or we'll see what happens?
As soon as filming and everyone gets back to that, because the entertainment industry, we have no idea how filming is supposed to happen. But as soon as we get some kind of idea, it will resume. So it'll still happen. It's just a matter of when, Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, when something comes out, let me know, and I can put it on my social media as well. We'll let all the rebels know if they want to check out your acting skills and get to know a little bit more about you. Well, we're talking about getting to know a little bit more about you. So because this is a podcast about podcasts and other things too, and so much more, as I say. What are some of the podcasts that you like to listen to, Kat?
Oh man, I am a huge fan of Pete Holmes. He is a comedian and actor. He has a podcast called You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes. I love it. It is fantastic. He talks about spirituality. He talks about life. He talks about comedy. But he has people on that, and it's weekly. It's like Adam Sandler and Patton Oswalt and all these comedians and actors, but they're talking about everything that's going on in the current state of the world. And of course, it's very funny too. But that's one of my favorites. Another one is second one. It's called Heart Wisdom with Jack Kornfield, and it's more of on the spiritual side, but it's very enlightening and it's very grounding. So I'm a big fan of that too.
We have a portion of the show that we call Shameless Self-Promotion.
Yes.
And this is where you can let everybody know where they can reach you.
Yes. callingoldhollywood.com. We also have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, all those good things. We also have a Patreon that people can sign up for and get bonus episodes, footage, audio, photos, a lot of stuff that you can't get in the public area. So all of that is it's the screen name's literally just calling out old Hollywood. So it's pretty simple.
Before I let you go, do you actually have a dream guest for your show? Is there anyone that you would love to find out a little bit more background on?
Absolutely. Stephen Bogart. He's the son of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. I would love to have him on my show. He's when I started the podcast, I thought about that. I said, if there was one person who I would want to have on, who would it be? And I'm such a big fan of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. So I would love that.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for you.
I know, it's so random, right? It's like, but yeah, absolutely.
Her name is Kat Lively, and Calling Old Hollywood is the name of the podcast. So if you're definitely into classic movies and TV and you want to get to know a little bit about some of those folks who made it so classic, take a listen to her show. And Kat, thank you so much for coming on by.
Thank you. I had a great time, and I hope that it goes well. Thank you.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible. You can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
And now it's time for Sherpa Suggestions.
For this week's Sherpa Suggestions, if you like listening to Kat's podcast, Calling Old Hollywood, here's a few other podcasts that have to do with classic Hollywood. We have the You Must Remember This podcast, Old Hollywood Realness, Classic Hollywood MTC podcasts, The Hollywood Read, Any Ladle Sweet that dishes out some gravy, and of course, the Three Stooges Throwback. Now, would the Sherpa listen to the Three Stooges Throwback podcast? Why, certainly. Hey, thanks a lot for checking out Too Many Podcasts, and we hope that you're enjoying Amazing Women, Incredible Stories Week. 5 days of interviews with ladies. You know, I don't get to do enough women interviews, and I'm really glad I got to do this week. And tomorrow it gets all wrapped up with a lady named Stacey Toy, who's a director, and we'll hear her story. You can hear this podcast on any podcast app, or you can go to my website, Sherpalution.com, and you can follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Sherpalution. Mr. Bruce, I've finished up my little bag of popcorn, and I think I'm ready to turn it in. Could you please show everyone the door? Thank you so much, sir. See you guys tomorrow. Viva la Sherpalution! Viva la Hollywood!
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?